Story 1. This is the Disney preview screen where Tinkerbell flies from behind the castle, loops in front of the screen, flicks her wand, and a dust cloud erupts from the tip. I swear I saw this on the old video home system tapes and will go to my grave arguing it. To clarify, this is when Tinkerbell flies in with the Disney castle featured prominently, does the loop, and dots the Disney eye with her wand. A search for Tinkerbell intro Mandela effect turns up many articles both for and against this specific memory. Story 2. The Fruit of the Loom 1. I will never believe there was no cornucopia. Story 3. Right down the road from where I grew up is a road called Wetzel Ridge Road, named after the farmers who owned the whole road. For 20 years I drove my wheelers, dirt bikes, and farm cars down that road. Wetzel like pretzel. About 3 years ago I was driving by and saw it was now Wetzel. I checked the property records and the farmers' names had all changed to Wetzel as well. Completely freaked me out. It was never Wetzel and I'll die on that hill. Among a few others, Mandela-wise, Pikachu's tail is another. This isn't a case of faulty memory. I lived just across the highway from that road and saw the road signs almost every day. Later, I bought a house along the same route to my parents' house. Even in my 30s, it was Wetzel. I sold that house in 2019 to move to Nashville. The pandemic hit and I wasn't driving around. Then, in 2021, I drove by and it said Wetzel. Story 4. Dolly had braces when she first smiled at Jaws in the movie Moonraker. Story 5. The Berenstain Bears versus the Berenstein Bears. I read those books from childhood well into adulthood, as my mother is a kindergarten through second grade reading teacher. Story 6. Stouffer's Stovetop Stuffing. I have distinct memories of stocking it when I worked at Albertsons. Story 7. I may have created the memory. I once saw what appeared to be an extra scene in Back to the Future Part 2 where Marty walks past Cafe 80s and sees Baby on Board signs in the window. He says, "I don't remember those," because those signs were popular only in the late 1980s. However, the only reference I can find is the Internet Movie Database entry that I wrote. I think I saw the scene in a version shown on an airplane. I own the movie on video home system, Laserdisc, Digital Versatile Disc, and Blu-ray Disc, and I have never seen the scene on any of those versions. Story 8. The Fruit of the Loom 1, for sure. I have a personal memory. No one else has ever seen it, so apparently it existed only in a universe I was part of. I remember it as clear as day. It was from Marvel Comics' response to the September 11, 2001 attacks, when heroes and villains went to Ground Zero to help. There was a panel that apparently does not exist in this timeline's version of the comic nor in any other, but it is etched into my mind. You see Thor from behind, standing and gazing upon the wreckage, his head bowed. Next to him, a New York Fire Department firefighter is casually handing him Mjolnir, with a text bubble reading, "You dropped your hammer." The implication is that the firefighter was worthy. I do not care what anyone says. That exists or it did somewhere in the multiverse. Story 9. Tinkerbell booped the Disney Castle logo with her wand. You cannot tell me I am wrong. Story 10. Growing up in the 1990s, our school still had those big pull-down maps above the blackboard from the Cold War era. I distinctly remember two things that I now question. One is New Zealand appearing northeast of Australia rather than southeast, and the other is Japan being much farther from the Asian mainland, about 3 times farther out to sea than it is today. While it is fun to think of this as the Mandela effect, it is just as likely we had bad maps and teachers. Back then, as countryside kids, we were not expected to travel abroad or make much of ourselves, so we were unlikely to ever go overseas. I find this explanation more likely than the false memory theory. Story 11. Ed McMahon and the Publishers Clearinghouse Sweepstakes. My mind simply cannot accept that this is wrong. Story 12. That Sinbad made a genie movie around the same time Shaquille O'Neal did. Story 13. While these answers are all interesting, I agree with most of them. How do I get back to the other timeline? Story 14. For me, the surprising part is the claim that the term bucket list did not exist before the 2008 movie starring Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. I recall hearing the term earlier. My father and grandmother talked about it in the 90s. Story 15. Those pants had a cornucopia. No ifs, ands, or buts. I would die defending that. Story 16. Mirror, mirror on the wall. That woman did not say magic mirror. I do not care. Story 17. I remember the blonde girl in Moonraker who falls in love with Jaws and how they bonded over their metal mouths. Story 18. Mr. Rogers says, "Beautiful day in the neighborhood. Not beautiful day in this neighborhood. I will die on this hill." Story 19. When I was growing up, my neighbor was watching a storm and was struck by lightning. I vividly remember the flash and the boom, and the man was gone. The police and emergency medical services were there all night. He did die. It was the same night as the thunderstorm. There was a large black spot on his driveway. Lightning did strike in our neighborhood on that same section of street. I remember it happening, but all the reports say he had a heart attack that night and the black spot was paint from a project they were doing. The lightning did hit a transformer. Story 20. It was spelled Chick-fil-A. I remember eating there for the first time after watching Star Wars Episode 1 in the theater and talking about how odd it was that they spelled it chic without the K. The conversation feels like it was yesterday. It makes no sense. Story 21. I rented and watched an action movie in the 1990s in which a hijacked plane flew toward the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. At the last moment, the hero managed to regain control of the plane and tilt it so that it flew between the towers. I had never heard of the World Trade Center before and was surprised when my husband knew what it was. I remember saying the movie would give terrorists bad ideas. I cannot remember the name of the movie or the actors, but I know I saw it. Story 22. For me, it's the Mandela effect. I literally remember thinking, wait, wasn't he already dead? When they announced his death in 2013. Story 23. I know this is a common example, but until recently I would have bet my life savings that the kids' television show was called Looney Tunes instead of Looney Tunes. I would have been very poor if I had. Story 24. A woman smoking in Gracie films after every episode of The Simpsons. Story 25. Mine is the pretty girl in James Bond's Moonraker who befriends Jaws after the ski lift is destroyed. She definitely had large metal braces. That was the whole point of their attraction. She walks up and helps him out of the rubble. She is attractive and gives Jaws a big smile full of metal, just like his, and they walk off hand in hand. Now there are no braces on the girl. That's absolute bullshit. Story 26. Does anyone else remember Walmart being hyphenated? I distinctly remember it being Walmart. And then one day I saw the sign say Walmart and I was floored. It was the Berenstain Bears, not the Berenstain Bears. I will die on this hill. Story 27. This is weird, but for as long as I can remember I had been under the impression that there was an acclaimed British actor named Clive Stanforth. He appeared in romantic comedies and prestigious British dramas, neither of which are genres I watch, and he became famous around the same time as Hugh Grant. I was not confusing him with Clive Owen. I found it interesting that there were two British actors named Clive of a similar age. I looked Stanforth up about a month ago and was floored to find he does not exist. Story 28. Fruit of the Loom has a goddamn cornucopia on the logo. If you disagree, you are a federal agent. Story 29. I swear I watched essentially the same movies, one with Sinbad and one with Shaq. Although Shaq's was titled Kazam, it was nearly identical to Shazam and clearly a knockoff. Story 30. The Mandela effect itself was named after Mandela following his death. President Barack Obama attended his funeral, and many Americans said they were sure they had learned about him dying in prison, which I have only ever seen Americans say. Seriously, Mandela was present during the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, an event watched live by 1 billion people. The rest of the planet knew he was still alive. Story 31. That fucking Tinkerbell effect existed, and I knew about it before I knew about the Mandela effect. You cannot convince me otherwise. Story 32. Apparently, Ed McMahon was never associated with Publishers Clearinghouse but was affiliated with American Family Publishers. Both organizations ran numerous sweepstakes in which they would show up at winners' homes with a large check and cameras. Story 33. I believe this is Lex, Season 2, Episode 6. In the scene, the prosecutor kills a prostitute while sitting on a sofa and the victim is on the floor. I cannot find that scene anymore. Story 34. The craziest one for me is Fruit Loops versus Fruit Loops. I swear to God the Mandela effect reversed. Story 35. To people who want to understand how the Mandela effect works psychologically, assuming there is no physical explanation, I can offer insight as a social psychologist. If you build 1 million calculators and enter 2 plus 2 into each of them, you would expect them all to give 4 as the answer. This happens even though none of the calculators communicated. The simple reason is that the calculators process information in the same way. This is the essence of the Mandela effect applied to humans. You may disagree because humans seem very different. But are we? Humans are remarkably genetically similar because our ancestors almost went extinct. We have similar brain architectures, and almost all of us share similar experiences. For example, every person and every culture deals with birth, death, eating, socializing, gravity, and so on. In fact, our information processing is so similar that there are lists of cognitive biases that are common across many people. Note that not every cognitive bias is universal, and I have not verified every entry on the Wikipedia list. The point is the general idea. Story 36. Pikachu has a tail with a black tip. In the anime, during the rematch in Vermilion City, Pikachu balances on its tail to avoid Raichu's thunder attack. Story 37. Most of them, I believe, are just people misremembering things and blaming the universe. The one that bugs me is Tom Cruise wearing glasses in that scene from Risky Business. The Simpsons ripped it off in the episode where Homer stops going to church. That's where it came from. The one that trips me up is Fruit of the Loom. That's where I learned the word cornucopia while wondering what that turd-looking thing on my righty-whities was. Story 38. My wife, mother, siblings, and I all grew up believing that Thanksgiving was always the third Thursday of the month. But it is not true. Story 39. An obscure one, but it really bothers me, the Black Tom explosion. It was the first terrorist attack in United States history and damaged the Statue of Liberty. Somehow I went 25 years as a history nerd and never heard of it. Some people say they remember being able to go to the top inside the statue, but that has not been possible since the attack, which occurred before any of us were born. I first saw this in a Mandela effect video, and it stuck with me. I cannot think about it too much because it makes me feel like I am in the wrong universe. Story 40. I don't know. I really thought the adult diapers were called Depends, not Depend. I went to nursing school in the 1990s for a brief time, and I swear the package said Depends. Story 41. Berenstain. No, I grew up with that shit. I watched the cartoons daily and I read the books before that. I learned how to read with these books, and I watched enough Reading Rainbow to know we always read the authors' names to give them credit for their work. Thank you, LeVar Burton. That last name is not spelled that way in any other instance I have seen, and it is a fairly common one. Berensteiner until death over here. Story 42. It has always been Flavor Flav, not Flava Flav. Story 43. I could have sworn Peter Pan peanut butter featured Peter Pan from the Disney cartoon, not some half-assed lookalike. Story 44. I am 100% sure that Car Mirror said, objects in mirror may be closer than they appear. Back in the day, I was allowed to sit in the front seat because our car did not have airbags. I had just learned to read, and I remember the spacing of the words made maybe look like it could be maybe. So I was figuring out how maybe was spelled by looking at the mirror. For the other Mandela effects, I am fairly sure I remember them a certain way, but I am not positive. I am positive about this one. Story 45. Chick-fil-A used to be spelled without the K in the first word. This is a hill I will absolutely die on. Story 46. I was sure the book or movie was called Interview with a Vampire, not Interview with the Vampire. Story 47. The Berenstain Bears were not spelled Berenstein. I explicitly remember learning to spell Einstein because it had the same ending. Story 48. I am surprised I do not see the Monopoly glasses versus no glasses commented on here. Story 49. Sinbad played a goddamn genie, and you will never convince me otherwise. Story 50. The line Luke, I am your father appears in the movie Tommy Boy, and that is why everyone misquotes Star Wars. Story 51. Dolly had braces. There is no way that scene would have made any sense otherwise. Story 52. I will always say sherbet. Since when is it sherbet? Story 53. Rob Zombie posted on his Facebook page that Sid Haig had died years earlier. I remember hearing about the death while with my partner. He remembers it too, and I even texted my brother about it. Years later, when the news dropped again that Sid Haig had just passed, I was floored. How could he have been dead already for 2 years? My brother did not remember my text, but I distinctly remember sending it. I was a big fan of his and of his role as Captain Spaulding. Story 54. The one it is named for claims that Nelson Mandela died in jail. I personally saw him speak to an entire stadium in 1990 when he toured after his release. I do not think it is a cultural coincidence that when confronted with the one major black civil rights leader who was not assassinated but went on to make significant positive political change, a certain segment of the population insists that he died instead. Story 55. I distinctly remember Sergeant Slaughter becoming an Iraqi sympathizer in 1991 and burning the American flag. Some classmates and I talked about it at the time. Reading about it now, it says Vince McMahon wanted him to burn the flag, but Sergeant Slaughter refused and burned a Hulk Hogan flag instead. Many of us still remember him burning the American flag. Story 56. My cousin was doing beauty pageants in her 30s for some stupid reason. One night, while browsing Facebook, she posted about it. My ex-girlfriend, who had never met my cousin when we dated, left a comment wishing her the best. My cousin replied that she was happy to be working with her on the pageant circuit. I found it bizarre and sent my cousin a message asking how they were working together. She did not answer. A week went by. She performed poorly in a Miss Tennessee event and finally wrote me back. She replied that she did not know who I was talking about. I went through her posts and either she had deleted them or I had hallucinated the whole thing. Story 57. There is an old video of a reporter interviewing a baseball player on a practice field. During the interview, a ball suddenly flies toward the reporter and the player catches it, prompting cheers. I remembered the reporter as a blonde white woman who sounded very impressed, but she was actually a black woman with dark hair and a much milder reaction. I cannot fathom how I misremembered her appearance and response so completely. Some commenters even claimed she was in love with the player, though her reaction did not support that. Story 58. The Berenstein Bears. I swear that is how it was spelled. I noticed a different spelling for the first time when I was in college. I asked my grandmother to send me pictures of my books at her house, and 5 hours later I learned she had died in a house fire. Story 59. I swear I heard Lady Gaga's song Just Dance in my sophomore year of high school in 2007, a full year before it was officially released. I have a vivid memory of hearing it on the radio in my car. Several years later, people began talking about the song. When I asked why they were suddenly bringing it up, they explained, to my complete bewilderment, that it had not yet been released. To this day, I have no explanation except that I somehow entered a time portal in my car. Story 60. The Pokemon is named Onyx, not Onix. Why would they misspell it? Onyx is not copyrighted. It feels like I jumped into Rick's parallel Earth where everyone pronounces it Parmesan when I see the name Onyx. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.